Every single breath you take will influence how you feel. Not only that, is the way you feel influences how you breathe. Breathwork is the thing that affects everything.
Jesse Coomer is a leading authority on breathwork, cold exposure expert, and author of The Language of Breath.
Taking action is very scary.
Yeah.
Because you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want. Taking one step forward is saying, this is the path I'm going to go, and just be willing to learn along the way. And I am not done learning along the way.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so human and actually an adventure.
Vast majority of us are born perfect breathers. And then just over time, just like so many things, we develop dysfunctional breathing patterns.
We do breathe every day. And I think somehow we don't make that connection, that we're not often connected to that breath.
Problems come from the fact that we don't give that part of ourselves the attention that it deserves. Awareness is the foundation of all positive change. What that means is that we have to learn to become aware of how we feel.
I just want to quickly thank you for stopping by and starting to watch this Pause to Elevate podcast. If we haven't met before, I am Dr. Kasim Al-Mashat, registered psychologist, mindfulness teacher, teacher trainer, and just a human interested in mindset, mindfulness, and principles in psychology that can make a difference in your daily life. My mission is to support you in understanding your mind to transform your life. If you've subscribed, thank you so much. If you haven't done yet, go ahead and click that button. It really helps me to keep this going and reach out to more guests. You can also join our community by signing up to the free newsletter right over here, and it will keep you up to date on online courses about laughter, mindfulness, retreats, online programs, a lot of goodies. Would love to see you there. Meanwhile, enjoy this episode, but it's really intended to be for educational purposes and not a replacement for any advice, care, or direction from a healthcare provider. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am so incredibly excited to share with you today's episode with a very special guest, Jesse Coomer. He's a leading authority in the realm of breathwork, and he's renowned for his contributions to the field. As a founder of Breathwork Tactics program, he provides first responders and everyday people with scientifically validated techniques for regulating the nervous system. I know we could all use that. Jesse is the author of a number of books, including A Practical Guide to Breathwork, The Language of Breath, which is a more recent one, really excellent book. He also serves as the lead faculty at the Language of Breath Breathworker School, where he offers world-class training to aspiring breath coaches. His expertise extends to being a human performance specialist, and he's a sought-after speaker. By the way, he's also an expert on cold exposure, and that's how we actually first met back in 2019. And he has a book that's just about to come out, A Practical Guide to Cold Training, which we'll touch on as well. So if you're interested in improving your breathing, regulating your nervous system, reducing stress and anxiety, and living a healthier life, this episode, my friends, is a must. Jesse Coomer, my friend, welcome to the Pause to Elevate podcast.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here and to see you again. 2019, I think we first, that's when we met. So a lot of things have happened since then.
That's time sure goes by. That's for sure. And
yeah.
I have to tell you, I think I was sharing this with you before we started the recording. I stumbled into your work on YouTube, on your YouTube channel in late 2018 and early 19. And I was a fan since then and have continued to be a fan because you truly are such a real, humble human being with incredible, masterful expertise, which is such a combination to be such an expert in a field, but just to be so real. And that's, I think, what makes you so relatable. And I've so appreciated you. So thank you for all the work you've done. This is just, I had to say that. Couldn't help it.
You're going to make me blush. You know, I really do appreciate it though. And I'm just really, really glad that I've been a part of your journey, and hopefully a helpful part for other people's journeys.
Thank you so much. And that's what I'm so excited is for others to really, if they not familiar with your work, to really get to know about this incredible work you're doing. So I wonder though, if we begin with like, how did you end up in this field, working with this human performance and working with human potential and breath work and cold exposure? How did you end up there?
Well, it certainly was not the plan. Not that I really had much of a plan, but if you would have asked me for the vast majority of my life, hey, are you going to be a breath worker or a coach or any of those things, I would have just laughed. Most of my life was really the opposite of healthy. I tried to get into sports when I was a kid, and I just didn't really like it. And I tried them all, but just never really got into organized sports. And about the time I was a sophomore in high school, I stopped playing sports. I joined a rock band, and I still absolutely love music. But a lot of the things that went along with being in music and things like that was trying to, ultimately I was trying to find an outlet for my stress, my anxiety, and just my overall discomfort, which later on I discovered that, you shouldn't be incredibly comfortable as a young man. You should be looking to, create your life. And there's actually a reason why we feel this way. And it's usually to help us, to propel us to create a better life. But most of the time, no one told me about that. I don't think anybody really gets told about that,
right?
Where these things come from. And so I felt like it was just something to try to, hey, how can I make this go away? And so I used, I did the classic, drugs and alcohol, and oh wow, it sure did work for a little while. I stress it works just for a little while, but that was my life, and I did everything I could to run away from discomfort. I never exercised. I never, it was just the opposite of who I am now. And really it was the opposite of who I was then. It was just that I didn't really want to face who I was. I was just trying to eliminate all of that as cheaply and as quickly as I could. And it wasn't until I got into my late 20s when I realized that this was not a strategy that was working. And I had a lot of soul searching that I did. And ultimately, it slowly but surely led me into, okay, so I'll try this exercise thing. And that was great. Oh, wow. Okay. I started to see what people were talking about. And then I started, okay, well, maybe I'll try sleeping at a reasonable hour. Maybe I'll try, just some of these basic things. And I was like, wow, okay, I see what they were talking about. And when I was 30, I finished grad school. So I went back to grad school to be an English professor. And so when I was 30, I started as an English professor. And I realized that I had definitely made a lot of strides. I wasn't self-destructive so much anymore.
So
but
progress.
I still, there was a lot of, I had a lot to be happy about, but there was still a lot of stress and anxiety. And I'd never really learned any way to manage that. And while exercise it should be everyone's foundation, and sleeping well and all those things, I started looking at other things. A friend of mine introduced me to meditation, and I was like, okay, I've heard this is great. So I sat down, closed my eyes for as long as I could. And 5 seconds later, I was like, man, I've been meditating for hours. And I realized that I had to learn some way to improve my ability to be calm. And so I started looking, as one does, on the internet, and, I discovered breath work. And the first breath work I discovered was pranayama, which actually at the time I was going to yoga class. Yoga is not something that's a part of my life now, but it was great that at the time, my sister and my brother-in-law, they were very deep into yoga. and they introduced me to a yoga teacher that I just really resonated with. And so I started going to yoga very regularly, got into pranayama, but you got to understand a lot of breath work is very subtle and it requires attention. It requires stillness. And so then I stumbled upon Wim Hof, and actually this is how you and I met. And I tried what at the time I felt like the guy just invented this breathing technique out of nowhere. I didn't realize later on he was doing pranayama. It was just, he skipped ahead. Right. And so now you're doing, very advanced, superventilation, and wow. I mean, it's really difficult not to feel a change. And so I was like, okay, wow, there really is something here. And I decided from there, with his program, he also was talking about cold training, and it kind of struck me as something I didn't want to do, but I knew that a lot of the things that I, didn't want to do ultimately led to a better state. And so I got into that, and I was really just fell in love with that. And then from there, of course, I worked with Wim Hof, and I met a lot of people through that organization. And because of that, it really started me down the path of, wow, let's really figure this out. And let's find out, what does a slow breath do? What is a functional breath? Should it be through the mouth or the nose, or how does this stuff work? Does it influence this, or does it influence that? And I just to kind of give you just a little background with my degree, I was an English professor, but I wasn't. And while I did teach literature classes, so I did teach, the American lits and the English and British lits. My main focus is research and rhetoric. And so ultimately, if you want to nerd out on a subject, that's what that is, right? So how to conduct quality research and how to explain it to other people in a way that's, it's reasonably easy to understand. And so it was perfect for me to major in that, because when I get interested in something, I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, well, let's see what if I change this a little thing? What if I do this little thing? And before you know it, I had nerded out in every possible all these different disciplines of breath. I'd, met a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life. And in 2019, maybe I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but that's when I actually published my first ebook on cold training, which later on became the book that I'm publishing now, A Practical Guide to Cold Training. But that was something that I wanted to share, because what my big thing was, and what really pushes me forward, is the story you just heard about me completely changing my life. A lot of it happened that way because I didn't know any better. Right. And I want to be the help that I wish I would have had. So every book I've written, every class I teach it really comes from that, because and who knows, I probably would have been young and dumb and I wouldn't have listened to me. But I always feel like if I would have known, the classic, if I would have known then what I know now, maybe I could have avoided some of the suffering, and maybe I can help other people avoid some of that suffering. So that's how I got into it, is ultimately, what is it? There's no wise man who didn't make a lot of mistakes. And it was just ultimately I don't know if I ever became wise, but I certainly made a lot of mistakes.
Well, you had the awareness and the courage to want to create change, because actually it's not easy to create change. And, it's, as much as we want to create change, it's comfortable to stay how we are. It's a lot more comfortable. So, the journey in your 20s, you're speaking about, late nights and the coping with alcohol or drugs or whatever it was. Like, it was just a way of coping. That's all you knew. But you had something in you that wanted change. And that's actually an incredible journey to say yes to change. And without knowing, like no one said, okay, do A, B, C, D, F. And then, in 1 year you'll be this, and 2 years, you're like, you just step forward. And that for me, like your story really highlights that. Like what happens when we step into something we want to create.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's one of those also, just like you said, there were no step one, step two. And for everyone who's watching this or listening to this, just know that that's not how real life works. A lot of times I've heard it said that you can drive across the entire country or the entire whatever continent or in the dark, as long as you have your headlights on, right? And you can only really see so far ahead with those headlights, but as long as you can see that far ahead, you can make it all the way across. And that's oftentimes, that's as much as we get. You do the best you can, and you try to take the right roads. And oftentimes taking those wrong roads is exactly, strangely enough. I mean, I wouldn't wish a lot of the down times that I've had in my life on anybody, but I think those things led me to be where I am, and hopefully to help other people, hopefully maybe avoid some of the suffering that I had to go through to learn the lessons I learned.
But you see, what you're naming too is being okay with taking the wrong roads, but you're driving, you're moving. You know what I mean? Like it's hard, there's a saying as well, you can't make adjustments to a parked car.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't steer it. You can't,
That's right.
you can't steer a parked car. Like you gotta move, take action, and then you can adjust. And that's what you did. You said, let me just take this step and the next one and the next one. And sometimes I think many of us just freeze, not knowing, like, I need to know the next 20 steps before I start driving my life. But that's not realistic.
Taking action is very scary.
Yeah.
Because, it's like they say, you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want. I mean, anytime the root word of decision is to cut off other opportunities. So, taking one step forward is saying, this is the path I'm going to go. And so, just be willing to, I guess the best advice I could give anybody is just be willing to learn along the way. And I am not done learning along the way. Each day it's not like, oh, I'm done, I'm fixed. Every day is a challenge, and we're always growing.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so human and actually an adventure. Like this, paradigm, this perspective you seem to be operating is like, here's this adventure. Let's take it one day at a time and keep moving. It's not like we arrived, it's done. No, there's nothing else to do. Like somehow maybe in the movies, it's like that. Like you just take a destination and everything is figured out, fixed, and then we're all happy. We do nothing.
Right. The end. It's not really like that
way. It doesn't. Yeah. So I'm wondering then, what really pulled your heart first was all the work around breath work. And some of the listeners may be curious, like, is that a thing? Like, what is breath work?
Right.
And maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So breath work is kind of a loaded word, and it's evolving, because originally breath work was a word that was describing using breathing to accomplish an alternate state of reality. So a non-ordinary state. So in the early days of breathwork, and I discussed this in my first book, a practical guide to breathwork. I give what I call just a brief history of breathwork in the West. And in the West, there was the original breathworks, and they were all sort of they were literally, the goal was to have a non-ordinary state. So you had Leonard Orr's rebirthing, you had holotropic breath work, you had liberation breath work, you had vivation, you had a lot of these early ones, and they were all doing, while they were different in some of their ways. Mainly it was, we're going to breathe deeply, and we're going to do a hyperventilation for long periods of time. And so when a person said breath work, a lot of people would think that. Now, over the years, there's been a lot of developments in how we understand how breathing interacts and interfaces within us, right? And so you might say it's how we communicate with our nervous system. In my last book on breathwork, The Language of Breath, I expand that even further, because I believe it's even more than just the autonomic nervous system. It's our whole being. It's the unconscious. There's this conscious you and the unconscious you that's interfacing. But now when we think of breath work, we're thinking about not only, okay, there is a way to reach a non-ordinary state, but there's also every single breath you take, and that will influence how you feel. Not only that, is the way you feel influences how you breathe. And when we start to become more aware of this interface, we can start to take an active role in improving how this inner relationship works. And when I say inner relationship, I know that sounds a little weird, almost sounds a little woo-woo, but ultimately what I'm talking about is everything that's within the human organism. And there's an unconscious you, if you will, the sort of unconscious processes that ultimately is where your emotions come from, your self beliefs, your sense of humor. I mean, this is the part of you that you train. So when we work with athletes, they practice, and then they say, I keep getting into my head so much, right? And so what we're trying to do is help them. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the unconscious becomes uncertain, and so it kicks things up to the conscious you, which is not as fast. It's able to do meticulous thinking, but not fast thinking. Your unconscious, that's the part when they always talked about, I remember in school, they would talk about how your brain is the supercomputer. And I was like, dude, I can't even find my keys. I am just, ultimately it's that unconscious you. That's where the training is. So when we use breath, there's a wide variety of how we can use breath. We're thinking about, okay, functional breathing. So literally how your physiology does the act of breathing, how it invites air in and it lets air out, how those things interface with your nervous system.
So that's functional breathing. That's a definition of functional breathing.
Right. So when we talk about breath work now, it's not just alternate state. There is that, but then there's the functional aspects. So these are realigning our breathing patterns with our natural breathing patterns. There's very few exceptions, but most of us, the vast majority of us, are born perfect breathers. If you observe a baby breathing, they walk around and they're not worried about having abs and their tummy's out. It's like a little sumo wrestler, and they're doing functional breathing, and that's how we're born. And then just over time, just like so many things, we develop dysfunctional breathing patterns. And this is something that when we focus on this aspect of breath work, we're saying, okay, we want to restore the functional breathing pattern, which is going to give you the best gas exchange. So there's literally, we're trying to facilitate the best gas exchange, but we're also wanting, because that better gas exchange, we can slow down our breathing, which is going to send a more relaxed signal to the nervous system. So, and that unconscious is like, well, I guess maybe we're not in such danger after all. What we'll often find is that because of dysfunctional breathing patterns, we'll see a person over breathing throughout the day, and they have a dysfunctional, basically they're breathing in the wrong areas. So they're using maybe the wrong pattern of breathing, the wrong muscle groups. And because of this, they have to breathe faster to facilitate what you would normally be able to accomplish if you had functional breathing. And what that does is it sends that message to the unconscious that, hey, we're not safe. And so when that happens, there's a lot of things that happen. So for instance, you'll have more stress hormones. You'll feel more stress. Stress will affect you more powerfully. So the stresses of daily life, they will affect you in a more powerful way. And we'll also see, for instance, with athletes and people who are really stressing their physiology with a metabolic load, we'll see they just can't keep up. And oftentimes with athletes, it's an amazing athlete. So for instance, right now, I've taken on a lot of athletes over my years. Right now, I have two very good athletes. They compete in the world championships in jiu-jitsu. They've placed multiple times in the top 3, and they and whenever I started working with them, they had very dysfunctional breathing. They had all sorts of issues with their breathing. And so it's interesting because, and I would say that that is a testament to the executive function or the grit, if you will, of athletes, that they can make it happen even though their patterns are working against them. So you'll often see an athlete, not just with dysfunctional breathing patterns, but you'll see them with dysfunctional movement patterns and things like that. And somehow they're still dominating, right? And so what I do with athletes is, and what my students do, the other language of breath coaches, they'll say, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to examine how you are right now. And the good news is you're already a great athlete. We are going to unlock something you never knew you had locked up. And so the functional
That's a big advantage.
aspect, oh my God, and then suddenly they're like, wow, I have more endurance. I can go harder for longer. I am able to sleep better, recover better, heal better. I'm not having such a long time from my overall recovery. And that adds up over time. And you start to see the athletes that get this kind of training dominate. And so when it comes to breath work, we have the kind of the older style, which is still present. And I still offer language of breath. We have some what we call integrative breath works, which takes a person into a non-ordinary state. But then we have the functional breath work. So functional breath work is literally just trying to make sure the physiology works as it's supposed to facilitate the best gas exchange and nervous system regulation. And then we also, in addition to that, we have specific techniques and methodologies just for nervous system regulation. And that is, so there's three main, what you might consider nowadays, when we say breath work, it could be any of those three things. And you can do all of them. Like in the language of breath, we do all of them. But for instance, maybe a client would come to me and the first thing we do is make sure the functional breathing and get all the natural patterns back where they need to be. And then we say, okay, let's develop a protocol for your daily life. Let's develop a routine. And that is to address whatever stressors or whatever issues or goals that you have in your life. So the thing about breath work is that a friend of mine, Tom Granger, once told me, he said, breath work is the thing that affects everything. It's that one thing, right? That affects everything from your digestion to your love life, to your ability to sleep, to your athletic performance, to your emotions. Like it really is the foundation for our lived experience. And it's sadly enough, it's not very well known. Yeah. And so when you hear the word breath work, and then when you see it on Instagram or when you see it out there, oftentimes it's just one of those, right? You'll just see one of those three. And oftentimes it'll be something where it's like, it may seem like, oh, this may not be for me because it's just this type of person, that likes it. And when you were doing my introduction, I do work with first responders. And so I'm the first breath worker in the United States, maybe the world, I don't know, but the first one in the United States to develop a program that has been adopted by a major American police academy. And this group, they, when I work with first responders, they were hesitant because they're like, I'm not going to sit here and do yoga and sing Kumbaya. We're first responders. We don't have time for that.
Do some humming. What?
Yeah. I'm going to bring my guitar and we're in my sandals and things. And so the thing is, regardless of what you see as far as like, hey, this isn't my group. If you breathe, which I would assume everyone who's listening does, breath work is something that can enhance how you live your life in major ways that are both immediate and long-term if you continue your practice.
See, I think you pointed to a couple of really important things. And one of them is, we do breathe every day. And I think somehow we don't make that connection, that we're not often connected to that breath. Or like you mentioned, there's the functional breathing, which many of us don't have it, functionally optimal.
We're all working
and then
on
there's
it.
the strategies or techniques, or there's a lot of the box breathing, or I'm sure we'll talk about some of them. There's many strategies. but you're naming a couple different things, and I wonder if you can go back just a little bit to get a sense of this disconnection. Earlier on in your book on the language,
Yes.
you talk about this disconnection about mind body, and why would you say that's important to address this disconnection that in modern life we seem to have between this mind body?
Well, and of course, my profession, my previous profession, I did 11 hard years in academia. No, I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I act like, oh man, I was on the chain gang, but no, I absolutely loved being an English professor, and the nerding out on how we express ourselves using language, and in every conversation. So especially in the English language, but human beings in general, we use metaphors all the time. And there's so many metaphors that we use that we're not really always aware that we're using a metaphor. And there are words that are based off of metaphors that were once used to describe a person or a style of, like, everything is based off of this. And it's great because it's a shortcut to having to do a whole bunch of words. You can kind of clump an idea together. And for instance, we talk about food, right, as a building block. We talk about food as a fuel, right? These are metaphors. It's not actually literally a building block. It's not literally like you're not putting bricks in there, right? We use it. We understand how the metaphor works. And so one of the most pervasive metaphors for humanity has been that you have a mind and you have a body, right? And I know this is going to be like, well, how are you getting around that? So this is so foundational to our understanding of what we are that, philosophers have talked about it. It's been discussed. And my argument is ultimately this division of mind and body has often caused us to see one as better than the other, or superior, or the master of another. And the reality is you are a human organism. There's 37.2 trillion cells that make up you, and they're all working together. There's an intelligence. Every single cell that you have has an incredible amount of intelligence, and it's all working together to create your lived experience. And so often we will we act like there's some kind of a weird border at our neck, and we'll talk about, my body this or my mind that. And the research, especially in the past few decades, continues to show that the human organism doesn't make that distinction. And so we feel our emotions physically, right? These are things that there's enormous amount of communication. And so what I like to try to help as far as helping us get a better handle on what we are, because when you I don't care how good your thinking is, if it's based off of misconceptions, it leads to other misconceptions. And in the book, I talk about how for the longest time we felt that we were made out of 4 liquids, right? So it's this old thing called humorism, and humorism is the longest held scientific belief about the human organism in all of history. For about 2,500 years, we believed that your humors, so a human being was made of 4 humors or 4 liquids, and based off of the balance of those 4 liquids, that was how your personality came to be. That was how your health was. And so this was for thousands of years. And then we had an amazing scientist who actually was a genius, okay, his name was Galen of Pergamon. We still use a lot of his words that he developed. He named the sympathetic nervous system. So we still use his word. He was a genius, but he built his entire philosophy on humorism. And so he has all these, you can go back and you can look at all these amazing things where he wrote about how to do bloodletting, because of course, based off of what we know with humorism, bloodletting, we're going to balance the humors, and that's going to bring you back into equilibrium.
So releasing blood.
Yes. Yeah. So bloodletting was this practice, and it was based off of the opposite. So we have to understand these people weren't stupid. It was just that very intelligent people can, if we hold something to be true, we base are thinking off of that, then you can come away with things that we would say that's ridiculous today. But they were very intelligent people. It's just that they were mistaken, right? They were building it off of a misconception. So, for instance, the view was that because women's menstrual cycle, they believed that was a way that women were naturally balancing their humors. Well, we need to bloodlet. We need to bleed in order for our humors to be balanced. And that led all the way up to germ theory in the 1800s. So we're talking about literally thousands of years. In the United States, the very first president, George Washington, he died. The official cause was he had a sore throat, but they drained him of 25% of his blood. That was what the official doctor did in order to try to cure him of the sore throat. So what I try to do in the book is I say, listen, we need to maybe just re-examine what we are and look at ourselves from a different perspective. We are an organism of action. We often see ourselves as a passive thing. For instance, trees are set, they sit in one place, and they're amazing, right? I mean, they make their own food. They're really chill, right? They don't get in wars or fights and things like that. But as soon as the sun is blocked or the rain doesn't flow or, there's an earthquake, that strategy completely fails on them. On the other hand, we are organisms that are built around action. And if the food's over there, we go over there. If there's a danger over here, we run away. And it's important for us to understand all of these things together. So we're 37.2 trillion cells that work together. And the game plan, or at least the innate strategy of a human being, is to take action. Now, if you know these things, right, and you know that we've recently discovered, of course, read the book. I don't want to nerd out the entire time on this one topic, but we do know that we have, and we take in about 11 million pieces of information every second, and we can only process consciously about 40 to 50 pieces of information. So 11 million pieces of information are being processed.
There's a bit of deficit there.
Yes, right. So it's wonderful. We have conscious thought. It's a fantastic thing, but we have to understand the vast majority of what we are is unconscious. And that I think that word, and again, sometimes things are attached to that word. It sounds like dreamy and things like that, but it just basically means, at least in the context that I'm using it, that most of you, right? Most of me is beyond my conscious control. The vast majority of me, I cannot consciously control. But I'll even go on to say, and that has led us to believe that there is no way for us to interface with this part of ourselves. We know that we learn about our environment from our experiences, and from all those experiences, that unconscious you forms an opinion on everything, including yourself, how other people work, what you should do in a given situation. Everything pretty much is there. But so a lot of times we believe we can't really interface with this, but I believe, and I've seen it in my clients, and I explain it in the book, ultimately, that it's interesting. We do have the ability to interface with that part of ourselves using our breathing. And so it's not that it's easy. It's not a simple trick. I've gone through all of that in my career. It can be simple, right? There's a lot of just very simple things that you can do, but there is a lot of complexity that you're working within. And ultimately it comes down to the way we breathe is going to speak to that unconscious. The unconscious is like, there's a deadline. My boss is mad at me, right? And it doesn't understand that your boss really isn't going to kill you. Right. It doesn't understand that you're not really in a life or death threat. But again, we're an organism of action. And so it goes to the old game plan. It says we either need to run away or we need to fight. Now, what happens at that point is this is where I think everybody's going to be able to start to relate. Okay. So a lot of this might sound lofty and confusing. If it does, I apologize. Please read the book because I explain it in more depth there.
Super clear in the book.
Okay,
and
good.
even here.
Good. But let's say you have a situation that is causing you what we would call stress, right?
Yes.
What is that? What is the feeling of stress? And actually, I forget the guy's name, of course, off the top of my head, but the person who coined that term actually, I believe it was English was not his first language, and he later on believed that he should have called it strain instead of stress. Now, let me tell you why that is. So you got the deadline, or there's some kind of a stressful thing happening. So your organism, the human organism, it's not like the mind and the body are like, okay, so what should we do when they're talking? What happens is your unconscious says, we need to take action. What do we need in order to take action? So it says, well, we're an organism of action and we're going to need to run or fight. So it gives you energy via the autonomic nervous system. It says, all right, so we need to start releasing sugar from the liver. We need to beat the heart faster, breathe faster. We need to enhance all of our senses. That's why we get so sensitive under stress. And this is going to help us to run away or to fight. Well, you're sitting there in the board meeting, right? Or sadly enough, or maybe you're laying there in bed trying to go to sleep, and you're unconscious, thinking that it's helping you. And again, I always like to say, and we'll do a practice here in a minute, called the smiling back exercise, and then we'll do a little breath work. But I always like to remind a person just to remember that is you trying to help you. That is a part of you that loves you very much. And it says, okay, all right. It seems as though we're in a situation where we need to do the only plan that we know, and that is to take action. So here's some energy. Let's go. Let's do something. We have to move. That's how our species survived all these thousands of years. Let's take action. But you know that you can't do that. Yeah. You have to sit there and look like it's no big deal. You have to sit there and look, and you have to realize that running is not going to help you. Fighting is not going to help you. You need to think straight. And so what you have to do, and what we train, for instance, when I work with CEOs, COOs, with really athletes, any human being, is we learn, okay, you have to learn what is happening, what you are, and what is happening, right? So once you start to understand that foundation, then you can start to say, okay, so when these things happen, you know what's actually happening. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not the boogeyman. It's not something that is, and I think that the thing that a lot of people need to realize is that there's nothing wrong with you when you feel this way.
Right.
It is natural, and it is a part of you that loves you. It's giving you energy. It's ramping up your energy so that you can take action. So what we need to do is say, well, rationally speaking, I know I can't take action right now. I can't. Running away would be a bad thing. So what I need to do is I need to speak back into this relationship that is me, speak to that part of myself that's trying to give me all this energy and say, hey, let's calm down. We're not in danger. We're actually quite safe. And if you keep on giving me all this energy, it's going to distract me, and I'm not going to be able to use the executive functions that I need to use in this case, right? You got to understand that human beings didn't have the need, or it was negative. It was a bad thing to stop and think, right? There's a coiled up thing on the rock over there. Let's stop and think about it. Let's see here. What is this coiled up thing with the big teeth? Is it and then before you know it, you've been bit by a snake and you're dead, right? So our tendency to react instead of think is because of the game plan that's already just intrinsic to the human organism. And so when we start to understand, okay, there's more than just one mind. So you have this conscious, unconscious, and it is permeating every cell in your body, and you can interface with this. You can play an active role, and over time you can form the strongest team ever, which is you. Whoa. Then you're saying, okay, it goes deep, but the nice thing is you don't have to understand it all to interface with yourself well. And that's the beauty of the language of breath, philosophy of breath work, is that we can learn, once you learn some of the basics, you can start to say, okay, that's my unconscious. I understand what that is. It's not going to, it doesn't scare me as much. I don't feel, I feel like I'm nervous. I feel anxious. What is this? This is a part of me that loves me. I'm going to speak back, and we're going to have, I guess, sort of more of a conversation, if you will, to have a better relationship so I can move forward with strength.
You know, this is one of the things we see in the book that I really loved. You know, you're talking about relationship with ourselves, and you use the Philly. Can you say a little bit about? Can you say about what is that friendship?
So philia or philia is the root word of, for instance, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, or philosophy, the love of knowledge. Ultimately, philia or philia, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I am not Greek, but I borrowed that from the Greek language, is ultimately the highest form of brotherly or love or the non-romantic love between two individuals. And that is what I'm trying to coin a term here, because it's very difficult to move beyond the old paradigms when our language is rooted in those old paradigms, right? So when we think about my mind and my body being these two separate things, and I have one singular mind, and then my body, I guess, is doing something else. It's like a Buick or some kind of a car or whatever. It's difficult to get out of the framework of my understanding when I have to use these dualistic words. So that's why I came up with philia, and I'm hoping that it catches on and maybe it'll help a person. It still seems weird, I know, instead of referring to my mind or my body, as my philia, my whole self. But hey, that was it's a suggestion. Is it going to come into the lexicon of the English language? Maybe it will. Maybe someone else will have a better idea. But when we start to see ourselves as a whole self, as opposed to compartmentalizing ourselves like a machine, then I think we're going to respect ourselves better. I know I would have respected myself better. We're going to treat ourselves better because we realize, everything we do is part of us. It's all part of me. And I make the point in the book that we often do see ourselves as machines. And, a machine you can leave a machine in a poorly ventilated room and have it sit down all day. And, if you think about how we treat ourselves, a lot of it is just how we understand ourselves. And a machine analogy or a metaphor of machine is useful in some ways, but sometimes the metaphor becomes so entrenched, we start to understand ourselves only in regards to that metaphor. And I think we've gotten to the point where it's actually causing us more harm than good. So you are an organism of 37.2 trillion cells. I like to say philia or philia, and you are a singular organism that is an organism of action. And when we start to understand ourselves as a relationship, so philia being this loving relationship that is you, then we can start to say, well, I need to take an active role as the conscious part of me. I need to take an active role because everything that I do affects this relationship that is me. And that's whether it's exercise or eating well, or of course, breathing, and that is the language of breath.
I tell you, I'll put my vote in for philia being part of a lexicon because it really resonated with me. And when you're talking about this, seeing our body as a machine, something breaks, I just have to replace it. And often in, even mental health, which is the area that I work in myself as well as psychologist and do mindfulness practices, is often people, I just want to fix it, get it over with. And I'm broken until this is fixed. And we miss out on the healing opportunity where we're actually already whole. I haven't used the word because it's your word. I love it. The philia, we're already whole and complete. That's a perspective from mindfulness. We're whole and complete as we are. And we can all use a little improvement, right?
It's so true, and the concept of, I'm broken, please fix me. It literally hinges on the metaphor, the belief that, okay, so we're really hinging on that machine metaphor. I'm broken, fix me, right? And you can do that to a machine. You can say, okay, I just need to replace this pulley or this lever or whatever. But you wouldn't say that about a relation. You wouldn't expect that about it. You might say it about a relationship. Our relationship is broken. Let's fix it. Right.
Yeah.
But we know that that's not going to be as simple. You go to the doctor and you get this, surgery, and now your relationship with your partner is fixed. Right.
Yes.
That takes time. And I think that is a more appropriate metaphor than a machine for what the human organism is. We are relationships within ourselves, and then that affects how we see everything around us. So that affects our relationships with the world around us.
As you're saying that too, one of the things as well I don't like about the machine metaphor is because it becomes a bad thing. Look, this thing in me is not working. Like if it's anxiety or this thing is broken, like get rid of it. And then we start pushing against something, pushing against sensations, pushing against feelings. And really what you outline in your book as well is like we're actually turning to them, getting to know it as information to connect with our body. And that's actually very powerful. So I wonder about that. Could you share a little bit about like mental health benefit?
Yeah. So I think one of the it's strange that this, it took me until I was in my late 30s or mid 30s, or I don't remember when, to really make the connection. And I know it seems like it should be obvious that we feel our emotions. Right. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how did that happen? No one ever told me about this. And it's so powerful that we actually, there are physical sensations that accompany these emotions that we feel, and that we are experiencing emotions all the time. And only the ones that we become aware of in any way at all, we call feelings, right? So there's an emotional experience to everything. And understanding that emotions there is actually a biological function to having emotions, right? So again, going back to this, looking at what we are as human beings, when we have an emotion, it is generally a message from your unconscious. So again, this is you. It literally is you, but it's hard sometimes to like connect that. But there's a part of you that is very concerned about your survival and about a whole list of things that have to do with your survival and with thriving as well. So it's not just survival. There's a part of you that's like, there are things that are either in my life that I want to be in my life, or they're not there and I want them to be there to be able to thrive as an organism. And your unconscious will send you very strong signals sometimes. And these are these feelings that we have. And I think we can relate to it, especially whenever we have strong negative feelings, which are actually very common. Strong negative feelings are more advantageous, or at least they have been, to our species for survival's sake. And that is ultimately, and it's sad to say it, right? But if you walk around and nothing's getting you down and things like that, but there's a lot of danger around you, you're going to be whistling zippity-doo-dah and being eaten by whatever decides to eat you. So we might have had ancestors like that, but the ones that brought us to this point in history, they jumped to negative conclusions. And we hate this about ourselves, right? We hate that we always jump to negative conclusions all the time. Yeah. But if you jump to negative conclusions, you're less likely to accidentally die. Yeah. And so
it's protective but, when it runs the show, it can be destructive.
Exactly. And so this is one of those things where those feelings can be very powerful, and they can feel like they're going to be there forever. And it makes us feel as though the way that we feel is just the way it's always going to be. And it's an objective, almost, it's like, this is literally how it is. And we all have experience. If you haven't, well, you will. Yes. But most of us, I would say all of us have experienced times when we really felt like it was one way very strongly. And then, maybe 24 hours passed, we slept on it. And then it's like, okay, so it really wasn't as bad as I thought, but the world was caving in on us.
Amplifying. The mind is great at amplifying.
And what that is a part of you that loves you very much. And you care about yourself. You want yourself to be able to thrive and survive, and it's trying to push you to action. So it's saying things are dire. Take an action right now. You better do something. And for our ancestors, that tended to be good for survival, and it tended to be, there was good outcomes. For modern humans, it's not. For modern humans, that's normally when we say the thing we regret. It's when we do self-harm because it seems like the only way for us to get out of this situation. So we'll make a terrible decision. We will, or we will literally do whatever we can do to make that feeling stop. And that's what I was doing. I had all of this negative, these negative things because there were parts of my life that weren't amazing yet. Right. And so I didn't have the things that I wanted. Therefore, I felt terrible. And that was actually me saying, hey, you need to get up and go and actually make something out of yourself. Here's some strong feelings about it. Here's some dopamine to try to get you to go do something. And I was like, I don't like the way I feel. I feel like I should feel good. Everything I see on TV says I should feel good all the time. And so I want this to stop. And so it leads us to a lot of these, misunderstanding about why we even don't feel good. And in many cases, it is simply because a part of it, it's generally the way we feel is because a part of us is sending that message. That's where emotions come from. And so there's emotions that we are aware of. And we generally call those feelings. There are emotions that we're not aware of that still color our experience. They still color our actions. And so what we try to do in language of breath, right? So when I do breath work with my students, if a person works with one of my students, our main goal here is to help you to feel safe. And when we can have a level of safety and flexibility, and this doesn't mean that you're going to never have any fears or anxieties or things like that, but ultimately, instead of having these extremes, we can start to say, okay, I understand that this is not a dire circumstance. These emotions that I'm feeling, these feelings are not necessarily, I know they're coming from a place of love. It's nothing wrong with me. That's huge when you get that. Yeah. And then also
not judging it.
Exactly. Because one thing I see all the time is people who feel bad about feeling bad. Yeah. And it's like, okay, you don't have to feel bad about it. It's not like there's anything wrong with you. But there's a part of you that has associated your current state or something, and it's trying to get you to take action. And so what we're trying to do with breath work is to say, okay, so we need to understand what these things are happening. What are the processes that are happening that are producing this? Calm down enough to think rationally and not do something impulsive. And then what we're doing is we're building that over and over again, and that builds a stronger team. So when things arise and life is full of problems and stressors, that way we start to get into the habit of this is a better way to approach that. Because implicit learning, so when I say implicit learning, that is the learning that the unconscious does. And we're always doing it. We're always observing, and you're not even aware. We're learning things without even trying to learn things implicitly. It's so funny. As an English teacher, I taught people where to put grammar, where to put the commas. There's 13 comma rules and all this stuff. But no one ever teaches a person how to put the music in their voice, right? Tone, inflection, how close to stand to a person before it's weird. These are implicit learning things that mean actually more than the words that we say. But no one ever teaches us those things because we learn so much implicitly. The unconscious is it's amazing, wonderful thing, but it's not always right. And so it's where we get our gut instincts. So sometimes it's absolutely right on the money. So it's important to listen to it, but it's also important to understand that it can get it wrong. And it typically will choose the safer option, which means it's going to skew to the negative. And so once we get to know this part of us, it's like a partnership. It's your best friend within you, because it can be absolutely your best friend. And I don't know if you've had a best friend who is like, sometimes it's like, man, this best friend of mine always, thinks it's the worst and always jumps to conclusions, but we got to work together, right? You will be that companion. You will be this team until the day that you die. And this is one of the things where, the sooner a person starts to work with it, and we all want to, again, we want it fixed overnight. but it is a process, just
Of
like,
course.
it's just like any other relationship. You
Yeah.
start to learn to trust each other. And then before you know it, life really gets good. Uh,
Mm.
and you just can't believe just how good it can be. But it really can be way, way better. Especially when you understand, hey, I'm a relationship. I can work within this, even whenever we're stressed.
Yes.
Even because it's not going to, it's not like you're just suddenly going to cure stress. Once we understand stress is a part of you that's trying to help you. Okay, so how do I work with this? And that ultimately is that inner relationship, that philia or philia, that
Mm.
that as we develop more and more, we can move forward and just have just overall a better time, a better lived
Yeah.
experience.
So it requires, I know one of the tenets that you speak about in the book is awareness.
Yeah.
For us, awareness, and that's the first thing, just to be aware of, like, how am I breathing? And often we don't want to look within because it can be uncomfortable. And anxiety is an example. Someone's having a panic attack. It's like, I don't want to be aware of this thing. But actually, with mindfulness practices, and I would love to get your take on it with breath work, is getting to know it. It's like, it's here. If I fight it, the sensations will get worse. But if I am with it, like, ride it, become curious about it, not react to it, it's just sensation, it's heart beating, it's breath changes, it's heat, it's a rush. It's already here. Like, the wave is
Mm-hmm.
here. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, we can't stop the wave. And when we to resist it, the wave's still going to come. But what
Yeah.
if, and that's a metaphor used a lot, which I really love, is like, let's surf the wave. And it helps a lot
Mm,
with anxiety and panic. It's like, which requires us turning to it. So I'm
right.
wondering, with breath work, and I know you're going to be give us an example and guiding us as well today. Would love that. But in terms of breath work, so someone is experiencing anxiety moment and they're like, oh, there's tension. How would you work with that? Just as one example.
Yeah. So you made a great point. Actually, a lot of people come to me saying, I want to learn how to control my emotions.
Mm.
And this is, again, coming from a lot of these old metaphors, a lot of the old paradigms. We're looking for control because that is what the mind body paradigm is, right? That is
Yeah.
what the machine operator paradigm is. All of it comes down to control, control, control. And the reality is you cannot control your emotions. This is wait a minute. You can't control your emotions? No, you cannot. You literally cannot consciously control your emotions because that's not where they come from.
Mm.
Emotions are coming from the unconscious. This is not something you consciously decide to do. It is something that is there, regardless of if you want it to be there or not, and it's coming from a place of love. So the first thing is to understand that these are signals. These are natural signals that are coming from a place of love. They're trying to push me toward what unconsciously, at least, I believe is the best outcome.
Mm.
Now, however, emotions are scary. They're confusing.
Yeah.
There's, it would be great in some ways it would be great if we were machines, because then we could just like press print and then it would say, this is what you're feeling right now. Right. But that's not how it is. So there are many times we're just confused, right? It's like, I don't even know how I feel. I don't like it, but I'm not even sure what's going on here. And it's like we have this splattering of emotions, right? And so what happens is we will often suppress these emotions or try to dissociate or come up with a strategy so that we just don't have to feel them.
Yeah.
They don't go away. Right? They stay there and they still color your experience, and you're not processing them. You're not getting any kind of release or relief from them. You're just covering them up so that you don't have to look at them anymore. And so when people come to me and they talk about this, we say awareness is the foundation of all positive change. And what that means is that we have to learn to become aware of how we feel. We want to just being aware of how we feel is the foundation, because then we can start to work with that relationship, because that's the message from the unconscious. Now we need to speak back to the unconscious. And it's not just disagreeing. If you're sad, then you're sad, right? But a lot of people don't want to be sad. I don't want to be sad right now. I don't have time to be sad right now.
It's not on the schedule.
Exactly. I'm busy. I'm a busy person. I can't be sad right now because I've got things to do. Right. And so much of our problems come from the fact that we don't give that part of ourselves the attention that it deserves. And so we're not allowing ourselves to process those emotions. And so what happens is over time, we learn to really fear those emotions. And so what we do with breath work is we start to teach a person how to become more aware of them in a safe environment. And so we're trying to speak safety back into this relationship using our breath. And when we feel, okay, I feel like I'm a little safer. Okay, I can peek back behind the curtain just a little bit, and then slowly but surely we become a person who is able to feel those emotions. And again, we're not trying to be at the whimsy of our emotions either, because there's the two huge extremes, right? So there are the folks that will just never feel. I was one of those. I wanted to cover it up, kill it, make it go away. I wanted to control. And then there are many of us who have a difficult time having any kind of executive function over those emotions. So those will be the type of people, as soon as I'm angry, everybody's going to suffer with me. As soon as I'm sad, I just shut down, right? And so those things that's not helping you in your life either, right? And so what we want to be able to do is say, okay, I am an organism of action. I need to be in the world around me. But I do need to stay aware of how I feel and allow myself to feel safe enough to feel those, even though I'm going out there and I can't just sit there and cry, because I do have a family that relies on me. I do have to be the adult in the room many times. And so I need to be able to have a way of reassuring this relationship that is me, that everything's okay. And then, hey, maybe whenever the time is right, okay, I'm still aware of my emotional state. You know what? I'm just going to sit here and cry for a little bit, because that's an important thing to do. And it's not maybe in front of my whole family when they're trying to, what do we do at this funeral? You're in charge, right? And if you're just shutting down, you're not helping yourself or anybody else. So we want to help a person, just like a team, right? Say you're heard, right? Everyone in the team needs to be heard. You're heard. I'm not saying I don't hear you. I'm going to work with you. We're going to take proper actions while feeling everything we feel. And then, we're going to behave appropriately to the situations we're in. And so yeah, I would like, actually, this might be a good time for a little bit of a practice.
Let's do that. Let's do that,
because there's an exercise we call the awareness exercise. I'm just going to kind of do a few of the language. These are sort of foundational exercises. So if you're like me in the early days, and you're looking for, hey, I just want to do something that's going to just explode my mind and take me to an alternate place, that's not this technique. And the thing is, if you start with this technique, this is the foundational technique for language of breath. Everything is variations of this. And yes, we have all those altered state things as well. But the key is to slowly learn and to increase our ability to be aware, so that you actually have a much more productive experience whenever you do those things, instead of just, okay, I was high and then I passed out or whatever. No, we can have a very productive experience if we learn this awareness. So let's just go ahead and just close our eyes.
Let's do it. And if someone is driving or operating machinery, you don't have to close your eyes and take time, come back to this afterwards, and you can listen along if you wish.
So when we close our eyes, and we just kind of, one of the interesting thing about closing our eyes is, recently I mentioned that we are taking in 11 million pieces of information. When we close our eyes, we block out most of those pieces of information. So we can start to become more aware of our inner state, because our external focus has been turned off. And so just close your eyes and just kind of start to scan yourself from head to toe. Just become aware of your forehead. And all this whole time you've been feeling stuff up there, but we need to sort of focus on the things that are most pressing. So often we will just ignore how we feel. So we're just feeling our forehead, bringing it down to the jaw, relaxing the jaw, bringing our awareness down to our neck, relaxing our neck, to the shoulders and the arms. Just observe how you can put your awareness in these places. And whenever you laser focus on these places, you really start to feel them more. And now that you're focusing on these places, the other places, you're not really there, right? So we're focusing on the arms and the shoulders. Now we're going to focus on the chest and the upper back and all the space between, down to the abdomen, the low back, down to our legs, just being present there, to our feet. And just kind of allow your awareness to grow from your feet all the way back up to your head. Maybe seeing how much you can be fully aware of every part of yourself from head to toe, fingertip to fingertip. And one of the things you might not have thought about is during this time that we've been focusing, you've been breathing the whole time. And so we're going to bring our awareness now to our breathing, observing the inhale as it comes through your nostrils, the exhale as it comes right back out. Now warmer air, moistened air through your nostrils. Inhaling in, observing the coolness of the air as it enters in, tracing it down, and then tracing it back. We're going to start what we call the awareness exercise. And that's simply we're going to trace the air as it enters, nice and slow, at your own pace, tracing the air as it exits. And then we're going to have a small pause between each breath. Nothing like a breath hold or anything, just a small pause, scanning yourself from head to toe, and then repeat. So we're tracing our inhale as we inhale, tracing our exhale as we exhale. It's almost as if like one of those molecules of air is your attention. We're pausing between breaths, scanning ourselves from head to toe. Breathing in, tracing the exhale in, or the inhale in. Exhaling, tracing it out as it goes. Pausing between. Really trying to be aware, tracing that inhale and exhale, and on the pause, just observing how we feel head to toe. You're doing great. Now we're going to experiment with actually hearing the voice of the unconscious. Really asking that unconscious you to give you its opinion on something in a very real way. And so as you continue this motion, inhaling, exhaling, pausing, I'd like you to bring something to mind. I'm going to ask you to bring a thought to mind. We're going to do a few different thoughts just so we can hear different things from the unconscious. This is not a fantasy, magical, woo-woo thing. This is very real. Okay, so we're going to start with a very strong one. I'd like you to think of something that makes you feel angry. So just one thing makes you feel angry. Bring that to your thoughts and observe the physical sensations that accompany that thought. Really allow yourself to think that thing. Think about it. And just observe the physical sensations that accompany that thought. Really focus in, just observe. Hello, unconscious me. Stay with it for just another few more seconds. All right, we're going to take a deep breath in, and when we do, we're going to clear our thoughts. Deep breath in, all the way in. Hold at the top and smile. Just putting your focus and awareness in your smile, and then exhale with a sound like this. Good job. One more time. Deep breath in, all the way in. Hold at the top. Focus on your smile. And let it go with the sound again. Nice. Kind of shake off and go back into that inhale, exhale, pause between breaths, going back into that same awareness exercise. Now I'm going to ask you to think of something else. We're going to think about something that makes you feel gratitude. So just bring that one thing, just one of those things. Don't go through the whole list today. Sometimes we go through a list. Just one thing that makes you feel gratitude very, very much. And observe the physical changes, the physical sensations that accompany that thought. Hello, unconscious me. Hold that thought. Observe the physical sensations that accompany it. You are communicating within this relationship. You are becoming more aware of the physical sensations that accompany a conversation with the unconscious. That unconscious you has an opinion on that, and that is what you're feeling now. Hold on to that thought. Really, really allow yourself to be present. Put yourself into that thought and experience the physical sensations that accompany it. Now, normally in this exercise, we do a few more emotions, but for the sake of time, we're going to go to the next exercise. So let's go ahead and take a deep breath in, all the way in. Holding at the top. Smile. And let it go with that sound again. Just relax it out. Deep breath in one more time. Deep breath all the way in. Hold at the top. Smile. And let it go with that sound again. Good job. All right, go back into normal breathing. And what we're going to do is just sort of introduce ourselves to ourselves. I would like you to just think about your own face, right? Your very own face, smiling right back at you. Just allowing ourselves the smiling, we call this the smiling back exercise, just to really concrete the idea that there is this other part of you, this unconscious you are in relationship all the time with. Maybe just say, hello, unconscious me, and just almost maybe hear your unconscious saying, hello, conscious me, hello, conscious Jesse, just fill in your name. And I am always here for you. I always care about what happens to us. So you take the front end of the store, I'll take the back end of the store. I will be here giving you energy, trying to supply us with all of our needs, working this physiology. And you, the conscious part of me, you do that deep thinking, that critical thinking you're so good at. And we're going to work as a team. and just kind of make peace with the fact that that's what you are. You are a relationship. And when you're ready, you can open up your eyes and come back into the room. So we didn't do intense breath work there. We were just using our breathing, but our awareness is really the foundation. And ultimately everything we do is in relationship to how we feel. And that's one of the ways we know that any of the breathwork techniques actually spoke what we intended to speak, because we can say, oh, this is how the unconscious is responding. And so we start with this awareness and we say, okay, this is this relationship. I can feel these things, right? Oh, interesting. I can interact with this element that I used to think that was just impossible.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic is with the language of breath. We're literally learning how to speak and how to listen within this thing that is you.
So beautifully guided, the way you did that as well, beginning with getting to know the body, do something similar with mindfulness based stress reduction, or MBSR program that teaches mindfulness and awareness. It's kind of getting to know the whole body. It was so beautiful the way you guided. And this element of introducing intentionally a thought that you're grateful for, and a thought, something makes you angry, and then seeing what happens. Because what happens, it's not like now I told my breathing to change, like change because I'm angry. Like I literally thought about something that was upsetting, from this morning that happened for me. Perfect. And I was like, wow, I could feel like a knot in my stomach. I could feel heat right away. I felt more tingling in my lips. It was just like, oh, like, I wasn't telling my lips to get tingly. It was just like, right.
And for those who are listening, when you've thought of anger, you might not have felt those exact things.
Right. Everyone's different.
But there are very real messages that you were receiving that you were coming to be consciously aware of. And those were all a splattering. Like it was, we really, whenever you feel angry, most of the time it's not just anger you're feeling. A lot of times you might also be feeling jealous, or you might be feeling like there was a moral code that was broken, or that you feel offended. Like there's a lot of different aspects as to why we might feel angry. And so we feel this splattering of emotions that manifest themselves in these feelings that it's very difficult to decipher. And then we think we need to decipher them. Well, what does it mean to feel it here?
Right.
No, that's not really a great idea. We just understand the reason. Okay, so I'm feeling something. What am I going to do with it? And what's it making me want to do? And is that appropriate for this situation? And if it's not, I need to speak back to my partner and say, hey, thank you so much. Thank you for loving me enough to send me this energy, or whatever it is you're sending me. But in this case, this is why the conscious you and the unconscious you, you're partners. Because the conscious you cannot do what the unconscious you can do. And the unconscious you, it cannot do what the conscious you can do. So having this partnership it's a perfect partnership. Really, it's a beautiful thing that we are.
And it's so accessible what you just guided us. And what I also love in your book, you begin that way as well, but you give like a whole manual of breathing approaches. And I really encourage anyone who's interested to pick up the book, because it is so well outlined. It starts like with how we began too. It's like, here's the science, here's what's happening. And then very practical tips, like box breathing. What is box breathing? Here's what it is. Here's how you do it. 478 was one of my favorites. Yeah. You mentioned that one. So like all of it is outlined, and I know we won't go over each one of them right now, but I really encourage the listeners to pick up the book if you want to learn more about all the different ways you could breathe. And there isn't, sometimes there's a misconception, I do this breath for this problem, this breath for this problem. It's like,
You're not
It's
a machine.
yeah, it's like it's just learning the different approaches and what your body's needing, right? So that's all outlined so beautifully, so beautifully.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said so.
Yeah. There's so many other things that I'm wanting to ask you. I'm just noticing how quickly the time has passed, and it's really quick. So I'm wondering if I can ask one more thing, and maybe we can do a round two for the cold exposure in the new book,
Yeah,
because
that
there's
sounds great.
so much richness in just the language of breath book alone. Like,
Well,
it's so
thank you so
full.
much. Yeah.
Truly. So something that often I get asked as well is, should I breathe from my nose, from my mouth? Can you say something about, is nose breathing superior to mouth breathing? And if so, how do we develop it?
So nasal breathing is where we should be breathing in most instances. So when you're sleeping, whenever you're eating, when you are, hanging out, when you're driving, all those things, typically you should be breathing through your nose. That is your first and most used inhale and exhale. Both in the inhale and the exhale. And there are enormous amount of reasons why. A few of the big ones is that it will filter out an enormous amount of what's in the air that you're breathing, whereas if you inhale through the mouth 100% of whatever was in that air, it just goes right down. Yeah, okay, so it's the first layer of your respiratory immune system, and so it protects all of these very vital tissues. Now, you have immune system down here too, but if you can filter a lot of that out before it gets down there, the stuff down, in your bronchi, your bronchioli, all those areas, they can start to take over, and they're not having to fight as big of a battle. When you inhale through your nose, you will hydrate the air, which makes it so it's less likely to irritate your bronchi, your bronchioli, things like that. You're going to have like for instance, if the air is really hot or if the air is really cold, it starts to bring it into more equilibrium. So it makes it so that every breath is ready to be absorbed, and it's less likely to irritate all of the tissues that are a part of your respiratory system. This is especially important for people who have respiratory issues, asthma, COPD, like there's a whole host. You want that air to be as filtered and as conditioned as possible before it reaches those delicate tissues that can become inflamed. Now, having said that, there is a reason why we can breathe through our mouth. It's not the end of the world. And so when I train athletes, that is when we start to learn how to breathe appropriately for the metabolic load that you're being put under. And there are times, like for instance, if you were to like for swimmers, it's just not practical to try to breathe through your nose while you're doing the freestyle. There are times when mouth breathing is essential, and there's a reason why it's there too. So I would say for the vast majority of people, though, the vast majority of people do not put enough metabolic load on their systems to consistently get into mouth breathing. So the vast majority of people should say, well, 90 to 99% of my time should be spent nasal breathing. And even those athletes that I work with, that we do teach them how to get into mouth breathing when it's appropriate, we have to teach them that nasal breathing you can put a very high metabolic load on a person and stay nasal. And the beauty behind that is that you're throttling. And again, think of all the metaphors. I always all these metaphors. We're throttling, right? Going back to the machine metaphor. I mean, it's hard to get out of it, but we are throttling the amount of energy expenditure. And so what that does is it helps us with endurance. We can still max out our breathing at a certain point, and then eventually we can move on to what we call other gears. And in my book, The Language of Breath, and also I get into athletic breath work more like simply, like straightforward in my first book, A Practical Guide to Breath Work. But both of them have this gears system in there. But ultimately, when you reach a certain metabolic load, then it's like, okay, now we're going to switch up our breathing strategy to either basically to meet the metabolic demand. And so there are times There are
Yeah.
times to breathe in and out through your mouth. It's just that we tend to go to those way too quickly or in way too often.
Yeah. And what's one way that someone can enhance that or develop that?
So the easiest way to, so a lot of people say, hey, Jesse, I would love to breathe through my nose, but my nose doesn't work. Right. And so the easiest way to do that is to do exercise. So cardiovascular exercise, nasal breathing. And what that means is you will want to start very slow, maybe just walking, and say, okay, I'm going to walk for 30 minutes, nasal breathing only.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if a person can get into zone 2 cardio, and so this is generally where you're on a elliptical or you're walking or maybe a bicycle or something like that, and you can sustain nasal breathing while doing zone 2 cardio for about 30 minutes, and you're doing this between 3 to 5 times per week, you will notice that within about 2 weeks, your sinuses just clear up and you're able to use those much better. It's just an organ that needs to be stimulated. The other thing is, like I will always notice, especially in interviews or when I do public speaking, that my sinuses will get stuffed up. And this is because when we talk a lot, that happens. So if you're a talker like me, you're doing a lot of mouth, at least mouth exhales. I try to do nasal inhales as much as I can, but it's not expedient really, especially when you're trying to have a really in-depth conversation. But what you're going to find is, and research shows, but I can also just tell you from all of my experience, that you'll start to have more of a stuffy nose if you are exhaling through the mouth a lot. And so some things that people can do to help that is, like, for instance, maybe tape their mouth shut when they sleep at night, which sounds scarier than it really is. If you do that though, do not like duct tape and everything. Like just do like the tip, because we want to make sure that that you actually can make it all through the night. And if you're worried about that, you can tape your mouth shut during the day. Excuse me. And if you do that and you don't have any problems with staying ventilated, for like 20 minutes or so, then you're going to make it through the night. And I recently, so I did taping through the night for about a year. And then I didn't feel like I needed it. And then I would say about 2 months ago, I realized I did need it again. So I'm taping my mouth shut at night again, and I get more deep sleep. I wake up feeling more refreshed. I don't have problems with snoring and all those other things. So those are all ways to enhance how our nose will work. And it's an amazing organ. You want it to work for you. So the more you use it, the better.
Thank you for sharing that. I actually use it myself as well. It's been a couple of years. I'm doing the taping. And for listeners too, you can, experiment with different tapes. I know when I first began, I didn't pick up the right tape, and I started like my lips starting to peel off. I found some good tape that's actually gentle tape. And so just researching gentle, soft tapes that don't, gentle on the skin is very helpful.
Yeah,
but this made a difference for me. It really has. If it was actually, it was a little scary. Like first, I'm like, what's gonna happen first night? Like, am I gonna just like not breathe and die or what? But then, like you said, experimented during the day first. What would it be like to keep the lips sealed? And then I found it interesting too. Some nights where my body needed more. Like I woke up, the tape is not in my mouth. Like my I had peeled it off automatically. So the body knows, right? And so that's an interesting experiment if anyone is interested.
Yeah. Try it out. Probably the first night you might make it 20 minutes and then rip it off and say, to heck with this, but keep working at it.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you'll be like, oh, okay, wow, I get a much better night's sleep.
I do.
Because a lot of us their mouth will hang open, and then you'll start to over breathe while you're asleep. So you're sending that message, that stress message to your unconscious. So your whole nervous system is in a stress state. and you're trying to rejuvenate, and you don't know why every morning I wake up and I don't feel like I got a great night's sleep.
Yeah.
A lot of times that's it.
And another bonus is my wife thanks me for not snoring as much. Like when I have the tape on.
A happy partner. It's a partnership with ourselves and with those around us.
Totally. Thank you for these beautiful tips. And you share other things. I encourage again listeners to check out your book. Things about CO2 tolerance, kind of breath holds. You go into all of that. And I know we didn't go into it here, but it's all in the book. It's really worth it. Highly, highly recommended. Like, it's really an excellent book. Scientific, practical, user-friendly, and just really enjoyable. So thank you for putting the book together. Thank you for taking the time and actually taking the extra time today. And I know we're going to have another one. I know I want to talk about cold as well, exposure.
Yes.
So we can do that next time.
Well, just to pitch the book. So it is coming out August 31st, and it's available on Amazon. It'll be on Audible, iTunes, Kindle, all of those things. And the Kindle is available for pre-order now. But August 31st, you can get your copy. And ultimately, this is a book that is focused around, I do describe why cold training is beneficial, but the vast majority of the book is a how-to manual, how to do all these different exposures, from getting in a cold shower to walking barefoot in the snow without losing toes, ice bathing, all these other things. I was fortunate enough to have professional cold swimmers that filled in some of the gaps that I had. So it is something that I'm really proud of. And again, it's coming out on August 31st, and it's going to be on Amazon, Kindle, and all the audiobooks.
I'll put the links in the show notes of your books, so it makes it easier for the listeners. So I'll do that. And I tell you, I look forward to getting into that book and have a conversation with you about it.
Awesome. I look forward to that conversation.
And I wonder, how else can people find you? And I'll put in the show notes in terms of website or social media. What's the best way for folks to reach you?
Yeah, so you can go to jessecoomer.com. That's JESSECOOMER.com. You can also look up Language of Breath. If you're someone who is interested in the online course or the book, you can go to languageofbreathcollective.com. And we offer the self-paced online course if you want to take a deep dive. Of course, the book is there too. We also have a Breathworker School, and we've just recently graduated the third year of that Breathworker School. And especially if you're interested in adding breath coaching to the offers that you already have, or maybe you just want to start just like I did and make that your main thing. That is an option. We teach a person how to do the business of breath work, how to do all the different styles of coaching. And in addition to that, we set you up for success. So that is available, all the information there on languageofbreathcollective.com. I'm on Instagram as Jesse Coomer Breath, and you can also find me on YouTube. I'm still doing it, still pumping out those videos. Just search for Jesse Coomer on YouTube and you'll find my channel.
Well, thank you so much. I'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you for your expertise, your realness, your humbleness, your generous heart. It truly is a pleasure having this conversation with you. It's been a pleasure knowing you. I felt again like I started to get to know you through your YouTubes, and you know what? You really are as you are. Like however you are on YouTube, you're real. So thank you for who you are, and I look forward. Maybe we can tell the listeners, stay tuned. There might be another one coming up sooner than you think.
I'll look forward to that conversation.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. May your moments be filled with ease and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you. Hello there, and thank you so much for stopping by this channel. I hope you find this content useful, and if you do, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It will really help me to reach to more people and keep this content going. Here we are journeying together, and let's see where this takes us.